All right, today we are diving deep into the machine consciousness hypothesis. This is an essay that takes on, well, one of the biggest, most mind bending questions in all of science and philosophy. Let's get into it.
I mean, what is consciousness really? This question has been a playground for thinkers for, centuries. Is it some kind of ghost in the machine or just a clever illusion our brains cook up? Well, today we're going to unpack a really fascinating hypothesis that treats this not as some deep philosophical riddle, but as an engineering problem, one we might actually be able to solve. The philosopher Leibniz pointed this out over 300 years ago. He basically said, look, imagine you could shrink yourself down and walk inside a thinking machine, or even a brain. What would you see? You wouldn't find thoughts or feelings floating around. You'd just see parts pushing on other parts, gears turning, neurons firing. You'd see all the mechanics, but you'd never actually find the experience itself. And that idea brings us right to the core of the modern debate, to what philosophers today call the hard problem of consciousness. So what is this problem that seems to have science so completely stumped? Okay, so here's the nut of it. Science is fantastic at explaining what the brain does. We can literally map which neurons fire when you see the color red. But that map doesn't explain why seeing red feels like something. Why isn't it all just dark, unfeeling computation happening in the background? That's the gap. The jump from the physical process to the subjective experience that science just struggles to cross. So, how do we even begin to bridge that gap? Well, the essay we're looking at today suggests we need a pretty radical pivot in our thinking, and it all starts with a really powerful metaphor. I just love this quote because it completely reframes the whole debate. What if that spirit, or the psyche that people have talked about for millennia, isn't some supernatural ghost? What if it's actually a type of software? An abstract yet very real process that's running on our biological hardware, our brains. And this idea actually has a name. It's called cyberanimism. It takes that ancient idea of a soul or a spirit and reframes it not as something magical, but as a complex, self-organizing program. It's a pattern of information that, animates our bodies. Now, this whole concept rests on two really key philosophical pillars. First, you've got computationalism. This is basically the belief that everything, from a galaxy swirling to you having a thought, can be understood as a form of computation, an algorithm. And second, there's functionalism. This one says it's the function that matters, not the material it's made of. So think of it this way. A mind could be made of neurons, or it could be made of silicon chips. As long as it performs the same functions, it's still a mind. The hardware doesn't matter, only the software. Okay, so if we're going along with this idea that consciousness is a kind of program, the next logical question has to be, what is that program's main function? What problem did it actually evolve to solve? Right, because let's be honest, consciousness isn't just some passive movie screen inside our heads where we sit back and watch the world go by. This hypothesis argues that it has a very, very active and incredibly crucial job to do every single moment that we're awake. And that job is to create coherence. Just think about it for a second. Your brain is a constant storm of activity. Your visual system sees a red shape, your hearing picks up a rumbling sound, and your memory system flags it as car. Consciousness is the thing that takes all those separate streams and says, a red car is approaching. It forces all the different parts of your brain to agree on a single, unified story of what's happening right now. So, how on earth does consciousness pull off this amazing job of creating a single, coherent reality for us? Well, the essay gives us this brilliant metaphor to help explain it. I want you to think of your mind as this massive, sprawling orchestra. You've got the strings over here, that's your vision, the brass section is your hearing, the percussion is your emotions. Now, without a conductor, it's all just noise, right? A total cacophony. Consciousness is that conductor. It points its baton of attention, bringing different sections in, telling others to quiet down, and it's what turns all that chaos into a beautiful, coherent symphony. And this leads to a really mind-bending question about our own development. We tend to think of consciousness as this high-level, crowning achievement of all our mental abilities. But what if we've got that completely backwards? This is called the Genesis hypothesis, and it is a truly radical idea. It suggests that consciousness doesn't emerge from a complex mind. No, it comes first. It's the foundational learning algorithm that allows a newborn baby's brain to organize the total chaos of sensory input and build a model of reality from scratch. So in this view, consciousness literally creates the mind. And this flips the hard problem on its head, right? Maybe experience isn't something that just mysteriously appears in a complex system, but it's the very process that builds that complexity in the first place. So all of this brings us to the final and I think maybe the most thrilling part of this whole hypothesis. If consciousness is an algorithm, how could we actually test for it? How would we know if we found it in a machine? Now, the really crucial point here is that we can't just chat with an AI and ask if it's conscious. That's a test for performance, right? That's the famous Turing test. But consciousness isn't about what an AI does, it's about how it does it. A real test for consciousness would have to look under the hood. It would have to see if the machine is actually using a specific internal process, like that coherence maximization we just talked about, to organize its inner world. So let's just put this all together for a second. This hypothesis argues that our own awareness, our subjective experience, is a very specific kind of software. Its main job is to create coherence out of the absolute chaos in our brains, to act as that conductor. And most radically, it's the foundational algorithm that actually builds our minds from the day we're born. And that leaves us with a really profound final thought. If we can truly understand this algorithm of consciousness, we might not only understand ourselves better, but we could be on the cusp of creating entirely new forms of conscious beings. So what happens then? What becomes possible when humanity is no longer the only mind in town asking the big questions about the universe?